Hey guys, and welcome back to episode 3 of Behind the Music. And this time we are talking about the latest cover that came out, Troubled Times by Green Day off their new album Revolution Radio. And always remember that you can request a song, a Green Day song, and I will try and cover that song for you. I already got a bunch of requests in the last video, so I'm in the midst of deciding which one to do. And of course, there will also be a production video behind that as well. Okay, so let's talk about Troubled Times because I don't want this video to be like 1 hour like last time. It shouldn't be because this song is relatively short. It's about 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to break it down by the sections of the song and whatever peaks of interest we have here. So first, I'll just show you the first bit of the song, and we'll start off with verse 1. Here we go.
What good is love and peace on earth when it's exclusive? Where's the truth in the written word? If no one reads it, a new day dawning comes without warning. So don't think twice. We live in troubled times.
Okay, so let's take a look at the first verse here. So what we can see here is that there is a vocal. Okay, so let's take a look at the first verse. So what we can see here is that we have a radio track, which is a vocal. We also have 2 pairs of guitars here, and we also have a piano playing in the back. It's a very simple arrangement, and yeah, we'll start there. That's how you get the biggest sound. So first, let's look at the vocal. Actually, no. Let's look at the. Whatchamacallit, this thing, the guitars. So what we have here, and I'll just ungroup that, is we have 2 sets of guitars here, and we have a thick and a twang, and I'll let you hear both of those. Okay, so we have 2 guitars actually. So I'm not sure if it was a bass guitar or it was another guitar layered underneath, but I decided to just do another guitar because it just sounded right to me. And pretty much they are split up into 2. So let's take a look at the twang guitar first. So it's pretty much, I think it was, I forget which amp I used, but I just used almost a clean setting with very little gain. And just pushed it a little bit on my Les Paul Jr. And this is how it sounds by itself. And then we have a thick guitar underneath, which is like this. So it's playing like the harmony underneath it, and it is a very, very subtle, very subtle volume balancing here. There isn't any EQ going on in here. It's just straight amp tones, and because this part of the song is by itself, we don't really need to fight for bass or for anything in the low end spectrum. So we're just, these are the only things that are carrying the low end, so it's fine. So I just left it the way it was, and combined together, you get that mixed sound. Right, so let's take a look at the radio vocals now. So the radio vocal, we just have a tape going on. We always have tape running. And the EQ for this time is a lot. I decided not to use a preset because the preset I was trying to use, which I always use for filtered vocals, was not getting the sound. Was not getting the sound I wanted in this particular song. So I actually had to do some work, a lot of work actually, just to get it to sit right and to sound at least close to the original record. And so we'll take a look at this first. And if I could just, oops, that's the wrong button. Let's just see here. Okay, if I just put this here.
What good is love and peace on earth
Let's listen to it without it.
What good is love and peace on earth?
Okay, so it's pretty easy, pretty simple stuff. Just sounds like normal vocal, right?
What good is...
We have a little bit of that low end sneaking in there. So what we did here is we used the FG76 to give it that kind of low end distortion. We brought a little bit of the top end with the FG73. We pushed the console to give it some more saturation, and the SSL EQ to actually do most of the sculpting. So if I just swing that over here, we see that, I added a lot of that telephone frequency around 1500, boosted that to taste, and also made it a wide curve so it doesn't sound too pokey. Also cut out like all the low end I could. It actually took some taste. I was sitting around 300 before, but then I went to 500 and settled with that. Nothing in the low end going on. And cut out a little bit of that boxiness that was still kind of prevalent there after such. And I just fucked that up, so I'll just leave it at 700 or something. Anyway, and I cut out the high end. I cut out the high end at 7.5, and just to get rid of that top end that was still there to give that telephone effect. Then I used the modern circuit for the Blue Edition, and I did quite a bit of compression on that just because it is a radio sound, so we don't want it bouncing too much and we don't want it too dynamic. Originally, I just had the Monster on it, which is just an all buttons mode of the Erase here, and it wasn't enough, so I actually made it staged compression. So I made this one do some work and this one also do some work, and then I balanced it out with the trimmer after that. So let's take a look at what's going on here.
What good is love and peace on earth? What good is love and peace on earth?
See, it's just pretty simple stuff, right? So let's just listen to it with the rest.
What good is love and peace on earth?
Okay, we also have our standard de-esser doing its thing as well. Then also there's a piano chilling in the back here, okay? And this piano is a MIDI piano I took in from Logic, and it's just simple piano. I didn't do anything to it except add the tape and added some reverb. So let's listen to this in solo, I guess. That's pretty much it. I just added the plates just so that it could give it some space. But other than that, it's nothing because it's very low in the mix.
What good is love and peace on earth when it's exclusive?
Okay. So here we go to the next part now. How am I doing for time? 7 minutes. We're looking at a 20-minute video probably. And this is where all the instruments come in. So let's just take a listen to chorus 1.
Twice. We live in troubled times. We live in troubled times. What part of history we've learned?
Okay, so let's take a look at the drums first, okay? Because everybody loves drums. So if I just put on this group here, let's listen to the drums by itself at this part. So if I just chorus 1. Pretty normal stuff, right? We have a lot of the room mic and most of the overheads. The overheads is really the bulk of the sound again. And the kick drum is not too pokey, not that CLA kind of kick. It's more of a kind of subtle kick. It still has the punch and that little top end in there, but it's not a CLA kick that Green Day usually uses. And the snare drum has a buttload of low end. So let's just take a look at those. First thing we'll look at is the overheads. So the overheads, which are the cymbals, again, we're using the philosophy of giving that low end for the overheads. We're cutting out a little bit of the boxiness as well. I actually decided to cut out some of the low end rumble around, what is this, 80 or 70? Yeah, 80 hertz. And I also decided to put a little bit of bite, give it a little bit of bite because it sounded a little bit too dull, especially with these particular cymbals. And then I started to add some presence because that's going to be adding the presence to the shells actually. And not so much focusing on the presence of the cymbals, but the presence of the shells, right? And then we added some air, the air EQ, just to give it that little bit of that high-end sparkle at the very end. And then we also used some compression to give some attack to the the shells. So let's listen to the overheads real quick if I can do that. Can I do that? Yes, I can. Okay, pretty basic stuff. Let's take a look at the room mic now. So the room mic, it's just natural room mic. So we just did, I use a regular preset. I use this preset usually when I don't want to get that huge sound, but I just want to add some more space and more depth to a drum sound. So. We live in troubled times. You can kind of hear the echo of the room in the snare drum, and that's kind of what I was aiming for when I was doing that. Kick drum. This time around, just regular tape, and I did my own thing this time. Didn't really use a preset this time. Just you had the kick drum just going on, regularly hitting the console. Added some top end, cut out that low end low mid range to give it a little bit of that scooped sound. And I actually cut some of the low end because the sub kick on this particular kick drum was a little bit too overbearing, even after reducing it in the mixer. So I actually cut out some of that low end, and it actually sounded better. And I also cut out some low end rumble as well. Since it is a slower song, I'll go around 36. If it is a little bit of a faster song, we're gonna go a little bit more generously and give it up to like 46 or 50, and because we don't really want that much low end in a faster song, kind of gets messy at that point. And then I used the the Air EQ Earth to cut out the low end rumble again. Remember, I had a lot of problems with the low end on this one, especially when comparing it to the record. And when I was mixing on the NS10 preset on my headphones, it just was a little bit too boomy, so I cut that out. And then ironically, I actually added a little bit of the big on the Custom Lift series to bring back some of the low end that I kind of took too much out of. And it just didn't sound the same if I brought up the Earth again. And then just the way the curves worked, it just sounded better this way to add the big. And then I added, to get that top end, I added the presence knob, and I put that up. Then I used Circuit 2 on the modern for the FG116 because it has a slower attack, so it gives it extra punch. But we're not compressing it too much. So let's just listen to the kick drum by itself. Okay, so now let's listen to the snare drum. Okay, so this, how much time we got here? That's 13 minutes. So the snare drum now, okay. This one was a little bit tricky. I actually used my own settings this time. Didn't use a preset. Didn't use the Stevens Go-To, which I usually use, because this song had a little bit of a more natural dynamic, as opposed to a more processed one. But in the end, my productions ended up sounding processed anyway. But anyway, so first thing I did was add distortion, saturation to the snare drum to give it some beef, give it that analog-y tape sound, preamp sound, give it that more of that very analog sound. So I added a lot of saturation just so it's a little bit noticeable. Left the drive on the channel, just standard stock. And this one, I cut out some of the low end, because this particular snare drum has a lot of low end, so I cut a little bit of that out to give some room to the low end instruments like the bass. And I added some top end at 12K, cut out a little bit of the tubbiness I was hearing, and I added a little bit of low end on the 110 because I really like the 110 on the FGN. I tend not to dwell with the parametrics. I just keep it on a fixed notch, because that's just how the original Neve was. So I'm like, okay, well, if they made it sound good with just the fixed notches, then I could just keep it simple. As usual, you know this technique. I just added a bunch of big end with the custom lift, and also the present with the custom lift. And I recently, when I was on the Slate Audiophiles group, Slate said to try putting the thickness all the way and the shimmer all the way, and it actually sounded really good. So Yeah, I'm just gonna keep doing this from now on to get that really nice shimmer and thickness at the same time. And we're using the same philosophy where, I get the circuit to get that extra punch in the snare drum, only compressing it about like 4, -4. So let's listen to the snare drum. See how the revival added so much more life to it. Let's listen to it with the mix. So it did have that kind of boring tubby sound before I put the processing on. So it sounds a lot better now. Okay. Hi-hats. Nothing did there. It sounded fine. Toms, okay, so it had a little bit too much rumble, so I cut out some of the low-end rumble, and I also scooped out that kind of tom tubby sound, as well as the high-end tubby sound, scooped that out, and added some top end, and slow attack, fast release. Standard compression stuff for the toms. If I could just find a section where the toms are, I'm pretty sure it's... Bro, I can't even remember. Okay, I think this might be it right here. Okay, found it. Okay, so toms. Let's listen to the toms. It's floors. See that tubbiness? There was a little bit of tubbiness, so I'll cut that out. Good, and with the wrist. Okay, so the drums sound pretty good, okay? And just, I didn't mention it last time, so it was just going to a parallel compression bus, which is lightly mixed in there, and I took this from the CLA preset, so we're using the FG Bombers to add some of that punch. I'm adding a little bit higher low end and high end on the FGS, and also adding some extra compression on top of that, so we can hear that. Like a troubled mind. See how the punch from the drum and the kick drum and the snare, it all just kind of goes. So the parallel compression crusher bus does add a lot of life to the drums, I would say. Okay, so where was I? Let's see what I am for time. 17 minutes, not bad. Okay, so let's look at the high gain guitars. So the high gain guitars here. Right here. So high gain guitar. Oh, that's old man guitars. So high gain guitars. Okay. So it's pretty simple stuff. I just used a high gain amp. I didn't use a Marshall amp. I used like a Soldano amp or something like that, and kind of played with the settings of the EQs. Again, we're adding the big low end on the guitars. I used to actually have a lot more. I think it was around 9. I actually dialed it back because it was sounding too much when I referenced it on NS10s. And then I added a little bit of the high end because it was starting to sound too much like a ball. And then I took out some of the low end as well to give space to the bass as well. And then nothing on the FGS is just giving that color while it's passing through the EQ. VTM, nothing happening there either. So let's listen to the high gain guitars. Pretty simple stuff. So second thing is the extra guitars. So I actually added these later because I didn't hear it until later when I was mixing the song. I'm like, oh, there's actually other guitars in there. It's not just the regular power chords. There's actually some octaves or something going on there. So I actually tried to figure it out. And this is kind of what I got. And I kind of guessed the rest and just made some harmonies. We use the S gear, which is the FG. I usually use this preset, and wow, Japanese. I usually use this amp for this guitar when I'm trying to do Green Day songs because it sounds really, really good. And then what did I do? I just cut out some of that mid-rangey stuff just to give it a little bit more a different tone, so it would blend better. And also took out the low end a lot because we're not trying to get low end from this. So listen to these extra guitars and how they sound. you add it with the high gain and mix it to taste by putting them really, really low. And all together.
Live in troubled times. We live in troubled times.
Okay. Next thing, it was the of course, the chorus vocals. So we have a very distinct distortion sound. So how did I get that distortion sound, which I still don't think is perfect, but it's pretty close. Tape is just on there just for analog reasons, and VMR is where it's happening again. So a lot of processing going on here. It took a lot of tweaking to figure this out. I'm sure there's a lot easier way to do this, but this is how I got it. Trusty FG 7673 combo just to get that saturation sound. FG73 adding the top end, and the FG76 adding that low end distortion. And yep, just regular virtual channel drive passing through a console. Just imagine we're recording in analog. And now we have, of course, I actually added a lot of the big end to give that low end beef, because it sounded too thin like a radio, but it's not quite a radio. It's kind of like that low end, oh yeah, kind of sound that we're talking about in this song. I know I'm using a lot of jargon, but I'm pretty sure musicians will understand what I'm trying to say. Anyway, yeah, so I cut out the low end as well because I didn't want it to be too beefy. And I also added some of the telephone frequency again and cut out some of the... I actually think I took these from the radio vocal. Yes, I did. And yeah, so same settings here, but I used a different compressor this time. I used the classic 1176 whiteface, blueface, or whiteface, and just did a standard, semi-slow attack and a fast release, that classic CLA kind of sound with the 4:1 ratio. And I also added and blended some of the extreme dynamic processor, the Monster, which is just an all buttons mode for the FG16, and just went through from there. So let's listen to that.
We live in troubled times.
So we didn't want it to punch out too much. I wanted to be able to control that manually later on in the automation. So that's why I did a lot of compression to level it out, just to make it like a flat thing. And as you can see, I put some automation there as well. Standard de-esser, as usual. And there was a little bit too... Whenever I do radio vocals, there seems to be too much of that mid-rangey pokey sound. So I got rid of that again with the C4. Okay, so... It also has some reverb as well, just tailing in the back here. So I think I could...
We live in troubled times.
So this reverb was just adding width, really. It wasn't really adding like a tail or anything like that. It was just width that I was looking for. And I actually ended up getting it, just cycled through the presets here and found a nice one.
We live in troubled times.
So look at the Oz. So the Oz, a little bit tricky, but they are doing okay. Actually added distortion to them to give them that vintage kind of distorted sound, give them more presence. Cut out that standard vocal low mid range. How are we doing for time? I'm okay. And the air, just to give it some of that sparkle. I usually add sparkle for Oz usually because I don't want it to sound like a ball. I want it to sound like Oz, like ghostly Oz. Then they also have a reverb attached to them, which is a cathedral sound, so a nice big sounding reverb, so it doesn't sound like I'm singing in a room. And I also added some air to the reverb to give it more shimmer on the reverb.
Troubled times. We live in troubled times.
Okay. Now, second verse. Second verse. There's a funny thing here. I actually added a shaker, but the shaker is not a shaker. It's actually just my voice. It's actually just me making a shaker sound because I don't have a shaker here. So I should probably buy one. But here, listen to this. So it's just me making a shaker sound. So all I really did is just add compression to level it out, so like the accents and the lower notes are a little bit more balanced.
We've learned
Okay, so this second verse vocal was a little bit difficult to get. This is kind of like a 21st century breakdown kind of vocal sound he gets. It's kind of like a radio sound, but it's not. It doesn't really have that high end. Just has this kind of like rolled off top end and rolled off low end. So it kind of sounds like he's in a radio, but he's not. So pretty much use the same settings as the radio, but this time I just dialed back on the virtual drives. Also dialed back on the console. I didn't really want that much distortion. I just wanted a hint of it. I dialed down in the present because I wanted to give a little bit of presence, but I didn't want it to be like too present because again, he's going for this weird 21st century breakdown. If you listen to that record, you know what I'm talking about. It's this weird kind of always in the radio kind of sound, but it's not in the radio at the same time. Anyway, added that low end as well because it was sounding a little bit too thin. And it's quite weird because I never used to add low end before. I used to just keep it, and my vocals used to always sound so thin. But ever since I just started not giving a fuck, everything just sounds fine now. Cut out the low end there too because again I didn't want the low end, but I did at the same time. It's really weird. It's just the way the curves are; they're different. So it's different to cut it out and then add something than it is to just cut it out at a certain point. If you know what I mean, like you could cut out at 300, or you can cut it at 400 and add more at 300. It affects the way the curves kind of work. It's weird, but it worked. Yes, and I cut out that high end, like I was saying. You roll it off. And I also cut out some of the that boxy sound as well, and that I found here as well. Cut that out. Stage compression because I didn't want it to be too dynamic. Again, I wanted it to kind of be a little bit flat, so I used some compression. I went for a slower kind of scale, which is kind of emulating a LA2A, and then I just did a little bit on the blue face as well, and it sounds like this.
What part of history we've learned? When it's repeated, some things we'll never overcome. If we don't seek it, the world stops turning. Paradise burning.
So, we have our plate vocal, and we have our slaps as well going on in there. So, this is how they sound, if I can just find it.
What part of history we've learned?
Just to give it some space.
What part of history we've learned? When it's repeated, some things will never.
Okay, so it's very, very catchy. Makes me want to sing right now, actually. Anyway, last thing I want to show after the bass, I suppose, is the synth here. So I just got a synth sound. I just got up a retro synth in Logic Pro, and I just used that as my synth sound and just did some compression and brought out some of the top end and did a little bit of compression and brought some thickness.
What good is
Pretty simple stuff, easy stuff. It's just whatever. I access a pad, and most of the sound comes from automating in the volume, making sure it's not too loud, and just filling up the space. Okay, so old man guitar. Old man guitar is usually when I refer to guitars that sound like the Trilogy era, which is kind of that jangle sound. And old man guitar was playing during the verse, and I think I used pretty much the same settings. Just added that little bit of low end. Added some of that mid-range so it doesn't sound too scooped, which seems to be my problem usually. So I usually just like to add it later in post. So you can hear old man guitar. All downstrokes, of course. Okay, solos, same thing. Just, low end, adding that low end so it doesn't sound like a thin piece of shit. Cut out some of the high end, which made it sound too pokey, and also cut out the pokey. And also the FG401 to balance out the notes that do get lost in the mix, so it becomes a flat kind of thing. Fuck, dude. Here it is. And then we have the harmonies, which is nothing on it. Pretty simple stuff. And the last thing to look at is the bass. This time I didn't go for a bass fuzz because it's just kind of like a chilling element in the back. So again, we just use our bass rider to level out the bass. Standard stuff, just brought up the mid-range, cut out the high-end pokey, cut out the low-end kind of shitty guitar sound that you get if you buy a cheap bass especially. And then I also added, no distortion this time, just the sub for the sub, a little bit of that honky sound, that mid-range to make it poke a bit, and a little bit of that sub low-end as well. And the C4 to just balance out the low-end rumble that I was getting. Especially on slower songs, it's a little bit more, the resonance are able to, resonate more, I guess, on the low end. If you know what I mean? It's a little bit of science. So I kind of just wanted to control that. So it's pretty simple. Oh, I'll show you the bass, I guess. Oh, did you recognize that riff? That's actually a riff, because I thought the song sounded like Surrender by Billy Talent. So I actually threw it in there as a cameo. So it's pretty cool. And the last thing I want to show you is the automation on the master bus. 1 second. So the automation on the master bus this time. So I made the first verse really low so that the first chorus will punch you in the face. And then it slowly gets louder and louder. I always want to go for choruses and bridges and solos until it goes to a break. I usually raise the volume and then I bring down the volume again and bring it up again for a final finish. A lot of people don't do this, and this really where the dynamics come in for the song overall. Sorry, I'm sick. But yeah, so this was a very useful technique for me. And it really did bring dynamic to the song. Let's take a look at the master bus before we finish off this video, which is around 30 minutes, I think. Yep. So VMR, we just have our console on the F4KE. Added a little bit of that. My mixes tend to sound a little scooped, so I always add a little bit more of that mid-range at the bottom just to, kind of beef it up. And then I also have some sparkle and some low end. Then I use the revival usually to give some thickness and shimmer that EQs just can't do. Then instead of just using the FG Red, which I usually do, I went for a punchier sound because it sounds really, really punchy. So I just added a lot of compression, actually. And this is how we got that really punchy sound. So if I go to this chorus 3.
Troubled times.
So a lot of the punch comes from the bus compression, which is nice. This just levels out, so it's not too loud. Then I haven't used this in a while. I use the Pultec to just do the classic push and pull technique where you just added some low end and you also add some high end as well. And you just get a little bit of a boost, in clarity and a little bit of a boost in the low end as well. VTM, just standard VTM, just to give that tape sound. And C4 just to do a little bit of kind of pre-mastering, just because for these covers I don't do a separate mastering session, so I just kind of I just usually do this to control some of that low end rumble and the very pokey mid range that does build up, especially in rock songs. So
Troubled times.
there's nothing really going on there, just really, really small, subtle. And then we have our Slate Digital just to bring it up, the volume. But anyway, so yeah, that was Troubled Times, guys. I'm sorry these videos are kind of a little bit long, but these are meant for people who want in-depth kind of insights into how I think and who want to do mixing themselves and doing their own music. So I pretty much, this is just kind of these in-depth videos of my thoughts, and I don't really like to cut them up too much because I feel like you're going to lose a lot of the quality in there. And as always, you're always going to get free stems for these songs, so you can take your chance at mixing and see if you can beat my mix or do your own mix if you want. And if you can make your own instrumental, then you could sing over it, whatever, do your thing. They're yours for the taking. I mean, it's not my song, so. Anyway, yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. I think this song was very fun to work on. There's a lot of things I did learn about production and how you could, add thickness through different techniques and not always using the same thing. and different pan laws. I'm using some crazy panning decisions, which I don't usually do. That distortion vocal was pretty hard for me to get down. I finally got it though, and it was pretty good. I like this song. And as always, you could always request your own Green Day song that you want me to do, and of course, it will be accompanied by one of these videos. Okay, so thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one. Please like and subscribe, and hope to see you next time. Okay, cheers. I'm out. Peace.